Amid the growing influence of China and the geopolitical struggle that has escalated after the Ukraine war, the world is shifting more and more towards strategic autonomy, deglobalization, and great power competition. With new terms like friendshoring and national security, nations are prioritizing local vendors for critical infrastructure like national communications networks. This is not a new phenomenon. It is, in many ways, a return to the roots of the telecoms industry and may be the future. Before the dawn of mobile telephony, the European telecoms industry was organized as national state-controlled monopolies. In each country, a single state-owned entity controlled the entire ecosystem. It maintained the fixed-line infrastructure, operated all services, established technical standards, and approved the select group of domestic suppliers. This pre-globalization environment cultivated a set of protected national champions in each market. The United Kingdom had Marconi, Germany was represented by Siemens, France championed Alcatel, and Sweden relied on Ericsson. In Finland, this role was filled by Mobira, a company that would later evolve into Nokia. The first mobile communication systems were experimental, costly, and served the narrow market. Initially installed as car phones, they were restricted to government officials, emergency services, and affluent private customers. These early networks were developed and operated by state-controlled telecoms companies like the British Telecom, formerly the General Post Office in the UK, Deutsche Telekom, formerly Deutsche Bundespost in Germany, and France Telecom, formerly Poste et Telegraphs in France. As markets began to open, national pride and industrial policy drove each country to back its own corporate champions. This protected environment fostered the rise of the European mobile gear vendors, allowing them to grow from state-backed R&D projects into manufacturing powerhouses without facing foreign competition. By the 1980s, these companies had secured dominant positions across Europe and were well prepared to take on the global market. Radiocom 2000 was France's first automated mobile network, replacing operator-assisted radio systems with fully automated public cellular networks. Developed between 1981 and 1984 by France Telecom in partnership with Metra and Segem, the network featured several advanced technologies. These included dynamic channel allocation, automatic handover in dense urban cells, and a dual frequency concept that allowed for expansion in the 900 MHz band as the initial 400 MHz band became saturated. Commercial service began in Paris in 1985, rapidly expanding to Lyon, Marseille, Lille, and other major cities before reaching near national coverage by the late 1980s. Unlike earlier public telecom services, Radiocom 2000 offered direct dial calls without operator intervention and allowed automatic roaming within France. It was marketed heavily to professionals, emergency services, transport firms, and business executives. By 1988, the network had around 60,000 subscribers, with over 90% using vehicle-mounted terminals due to their high power requirement and need for large nickel-cadmium batteries. Early terminals were bulky but smaller than their 1970s counterparts, with rooftop whip antennas replacing older mast designs. The arrival of mobile telephony in France during the 1980s marked a subtle change in French social life. Their high cost, limited availability, and association with business travel meant they were primarily used by executives, government officials, and professionals in high-status sectors. The coverage expanded slowly and unevenly, reinforcing the divide between Paris and the provinces. In the capital and major cities, mobile phones became part of the new urban rhythm, used by business people navigating meetings, traffic, and tight schedules. In rural areas, however, mobile phones remain rare and often impractical. The image of a cadre superior taking a call from his car became a cultural shorthand for modern corporate power. French media coverage of early mobile phones often expressed ambivalence. On one hand, mobile telephony was celebrated as a sign of national technological competence and modernity. On the other hand, it was criticized as a symbol of excessive work pressure, American-style hyperconnectivity, or the erosion of traditional social rhythms. The early mobile phone challenged the much-cherished French work-life boundary by introducing the expectation of constant availability, particularly for professionals. Yet, the French response was cautious. many early users resisted the idea of being reachable outside working hours, viewing it as an intrusion into personal life. This tension produced a uniquely French solution for mobile etiquette. Some professionals use mobile phones selectively, turning them off outside business hours. Others treated mobile phone calls as strictly functional, avoiding casual or social use. This created new challenges for French norms of politeness and public behavior. Speaking loudly in public areas, interrupting conversations to take calls, or using mobile phones in cafes and restaurants were initially seen as breaches of etiquette. Over time, informal norms emerged. Calls were taken discreetly or outside. Phones were silenced in formal settings, and public conversations were kept brief. The network relied on French industrial collaboration. Alcatel supplied the core infrastructure, providing the switching systems and base stations, while Motorola and Siemens led in producing handsets and car phones. All three manufacturers also adapted the technology for export, supplying analog systems to countries in Latin America and the Middle East. Competition emerged in 1988 with the launch of Société Française du Radiotéléphone's Nordic Mobile Telephony Network, which offered cross-border compatibility with Switzerland and the Nordic countries. This new pressure forced France Telecom to accelerate its network densification and expand handset choices for customers. To alleviate growing congestion, dual-band devices like the Motorola MC2000X and models from Siemens and Alcatel appeared around 1990, enabling more efficient use of the spectrum. With these improvements, Radiocom 2000 remained France's flagship service until the arrival of GSM in 1992 and was ultimately decommissioned in the year 2000. The British introduced theirs a few years later. In 1985, the UK launched its first analog cellular service using the Total Access Communication System. This standard was a British adaptation of the American AMPS standard, which had been originally developed by Bell Labs. A key difference in this adaptation was re-engineering the technology to operate in the 900 MHz band, unlike its American predecessor, which used 800 MHz. To ensure competition, the government issued two licenses. One was awarded to a consortium of BT and Securicore, which launched its service under the name Cellnet. The other license went to a joint venture between Racal and Telecom, which chose the name Vodafone, a clever acronym for Voice and Data over Telephone. This dual launch ushered in the dawn of the mobile age for British consumers and businesses. Vodafone contracted Ericsson for a £30 million turnkey deal, which included building 100 base stations and mobile exchanges, though at launch only 10 base stations were active, covering London. The first UK mobile call was made at midnight on 1st January 1985. The Cellnet network followed shortly after. While the American ARM standard was designed for the 800 MHz band, its British derivative, TAX, was engineered to operate at 900 MHz. This strategic decision placed it just above the crowded UHF TV band, situating it far above the lower frequencies used for FM radio and VHF television. This approach contrasted with the strategy seen elsewhere in Europe. At the time, Nordic countries were developing the NMT standard and West Germany its CNET, both operating at 450 MHz. This lower frequency band had been deliberately chosen from the outset to nestle between major broadcasting frequencies, sitting safely above the AM and FM radio bands and below the UHF television spectrum, thereby avoiding interference from the start. In the UK, early mobile phones became some of the most visible status symbols of the 1980s. Their high cost and association with business elites meant that they were initially used by financial traders, corporate executives, and high-earning professionals. This was the era of the Yappy and the mobile phone, often a large brick-like device, which became a defining accessory of that identity. British media played a major role in shaping early mobile phone culture. Newspapers and television programs frequently portrayed mobile phones as symbols of greed, flashiness, social pretension, and the excesses of the financial sector. Mobile phones were simultaneously admired and mocked, celebrated and satirized. This ambivalence reflected broader anxieties about rising inequality, the pace of technological change, and the cultural impacts of the Thatcher-era capitalism. The 1980s saw the rise of flexible working hours, increased commuting, and a growing emphasis on productivity. Mobile phones fit neatly into this evolving landscape. This contributed to subtle shifts in expectations around availability. Being reachable outside office hours became a sign of professionalism and ambition. Aggressive advertising framed mobile phones as tools of personal empowerment and modernity. This commercial environment helped mobile phones enter public consciousness more quickly than in any other European country. The UK's consumer culture played a central role in transforming mobile phones from elite tools into desirable lifestyle objects. The arrival of mobile phones disrupted norms. British society places strong emphasis on politeness, discretion, and respect for public space. Questions like, was it acceptable to take a call on a train? How loud should one speak in public? And should mobile phones be used in pubs or restaurants became the main public discussions. Over time, British society developed informal rules like keep calls short in public, avoid loud conversations, and silence phones in formal settings. British electronics company Plessey was the main provider of base stations and RF gear, with Marconi assisting with call switching and radio network equipment. Marconi also supplied microwave backhaul links, radio transceivers, and call switching equipment for various European 1G networks, particularly NMT systems in Scandinavia. Despite limitations like congestion, limited security, and lack of interoperability, tax rapidly spread and democratized mobile access. The competition between Vodafone and Cellnet drove swift reductions in cost and steep rise in users. By 1988, both operators had surpassed 500,000 subscribers, with the network coverage nearing 90% of UK population. Yet, tax, analog architecture, and inherent flaws highlighted the urgent need for a smoother, more secure, and interoperable standard, ushering in the era of GSM. Vodafone launched GSM services in early 1990s after its demerger from Alcatel in 1991. CNET represented the culmination of Germany's analog mobile era. As the country's third and final public mobile network, following the A-Net and B-Net, it became one of the most advanced analog cellular systems in Europe. Developed through a partnership between Siemens and the state provider Bundespost, later Deutsche Telecom, it entered commercial service in 1985 after successful trials in 1984, ultimately replacing the semi-automatic B-Net. This new system was a landmark, introducing Germany to a truly mobile cellular experience with three key innovations: fully automatic call setup, seamless handover between cells, and location-independent subscriber numbers. The CNET system was technologically advanced for its time, offering better voice quality and coverage than many European counterparts. Initially deployed in West Germany, CNET expanded rapidly after German unification in 1990. When it rolled out in the former East Germany to help bridge Germany's telecommunications gap. At its peak in the early 1990s, it served around 800,000 subscribers, particularly in rural areas where its high-power macro cell design ensured wide coverage. Taxi fleets, emergency services, transport companies, and business professionals favored it for its reliability in remote areas. In Germany, early mobile phones were closely associated with professional authority, particularly in engineering, logistics, and business sectors. Unlike in some European countries where early mobile phones were flocked as luxury items, in Germany, they were often framed as tools for efficiency and professional necessity. The cultural emphasis on practicality meant that mobile phones were respected less as status symbols and more as instruments of serious work. In contrast to countries where mobile phones were primarily an urban phenomenon, Germany's early mobile culture was more evenly distributed, reflecting the country's federal structure and strong regional economies. The Autobahn, already a symbol of German mobility and efficiency, became a key site of early mobile phone use. The car evolved into a mobile workspace, reinforcing the cultural association between mobility, productivity, and technical mastery. Many Germans were cautious about the idea of being reachable at all times. This behavior reflected a broader general cultural pattern. Technology is embraced when it serves efficiency, but resisted when it threatens personal autonomy. This tension foreshadowed later national debates about data protection and digital privacy, which will eventually make Germany one of the strongest advocates for strict privacy regulations in Europe. German media coverage of early mobile phones often expressed ambivalence. On one hand, mobile telephony was celebrated as a sign of technological progress and national competence. On the other hand, it was criticized as a symbol of stress, overwork, or American-style hyperconnectivity. Early mobile users were expected to behave with discretion and respect for shared spaces. Loud conversations on trains or in restaurants were widely frowned upon. The CNET network used the 450 MHz spectrum and had cells arranged in 7-cell reuse clusters, with typical microcell radius of 15 to 20 kilometers and microcells at 2 to 3 kilometers in dense cities. Base stations transmitted at up to 25 watts, while mobile units range from 50 milliwatt handhelds to 15 watt car phones. CNET pioneered several innovations for 1G systems, including removable magnetic strip SIM cards, automatic roaming within Germany, and seamless handover between cells during movements. Siemens served as the primary architect of the CNET, designing and supplying the core network infrastructure, including switches and base stations, as well as a range of terminal devices. The company manufactured handsets and car phones, even producing ruggedized models for commercial users like taxi services. Beyond Germany, Siemens played a dual role. It successfully exported the CNET's technology and was also a key participant in the pan-European standardization effort that developed GSM. AEG Telefunken acted as a secondary supplier of base stations and switching gear, while Philips provided handsets and RF modules, often in partnership with Siemens. Terminals evolved from bulky car phones to early handy mobile phones, but even the smallest remained heavier than early GSM units. Capacity constraints emerged as subscriber numbers grew. Call queuing became common in peak hours, and spectral efficiency lagged behind digital GSM, which began service in 1992. CNET was gradually phased out in favor of GSM, with shutdown completed on the 31st of December 2000. Launched in 1981, the Nordic Mobile Telephone Standard was a watershed moment in communications, creating the world's first multinational cellular network. It emerged from an unprecedented collaboration between Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden, deliberately designed to overcome Europe's patchwork of national systems. NMT pioneered the core principles of modern mobile telephony, introducing seamless international roaming, automatic handover between base stations, and efficient small cell frequency reuse, all of which became foundational to all future cellular technologies. Its open and royalty-free specifications also democratized the gear market. By allowing any company to manufacture compatible hardware, it spurred intense competition that drove down costs and accelerated the pace of innovation. In proving that a mobile network could operate seamlessly across borders, NMT didn't just connect the Nordic countries, it provided the essential blueprint for a globally unified network standard, directly paving the way for the GSM standard that would follow. Conceived in the early 1970s by a joint committee of then state-owned Post, Telegraph and Telecom companies, Denmark Teledenmark, Finland's Postufilin, Norway's Televerket, and Sweden's Televerket, the goal was to replace fragmented and incompatible cellular networks like Finland's ARP and Sweden's MTD. By 1975, the partners had finalized the standard, prioritizing a set of revolutionary features. Their design was centered on a fully automated call setup, comprehensive nationwide coverage, and intelligent frequency reuse to make the most of their limited radio spectrum, laying the technical groundwork for the modern cellular world. Although designed for the Nordic countries, the first operational NMT network went live not in Scandinavia but in Saudi Arabia on September 1, 1981. Commercial service in the Nordic regions began weeks later, Sweden and Norway in October 1981, Denmark and Finland in 1982, and Iceland in 1986. A key to NMT's rapid growth was its open, non-proprietary design. This democratized the market, allowing manufacturers like Ericsson, Nokia's Mobira, and Storno to compete directly. This competition spurred innovation and drove down costs for consumers. The effects were noticeable. By 1985, NMT served over 110,000 subscribers, making it the largest cellular network in the world. NMT quickly spread beyond the Nordics, operating in more than 40 countries at its peak. In Europe, adopters included the Netherlands in 1985, Switzerland in 1987, and France in 1989. In Asia, early deployment appeared in Malaysia in 1985, Thailand in 1986, and China in 1986. In the Middle East and Africa, Saudi Arabia led the way in 1981, followed by Turkey in 1986 and Morocco in 1987. Technical innovations included automatic handover between cells, international roaming support, and dynamic power control, which reduced handset output from up to 15 watt in rural areas to as little as 1 watt in dense urban zones, extending battery life and reducing interference. In the Nordic countries, Ericsson and Nokia were the dominant suppliers of switching, base stations, and handsets. Despite these advances, NMT shared the vulnerabilities of all 1G analog systems: limited capacity, susceptibility to eavesdropping and interference, and sometimes long call queues during peak hours. Additionally, while the system allowed roaming in the Nordic region, variations in frequency allocation and network implementations in other countries often hampered seamless cross-border use. With the rise of digital GSM in the 1990s, NMT entered a gradual phase-out. Finland and Estonia shut down their networks in 2000, Norway in 2004, Sweden in 2007, Russia between 2006 and 2008, and Iceland as late as 2010. Some remote areas in Russia and Kazakhstan reportedly maintained small-scale NMT services into the 2020s for ultra-long-range rural coverage. By the early 2000s, European telecoms firms had leveraged the globalization of mobile equipment market to transform from national champions into global leaders. They achieved this by outpacing American and Japanese rivals through a superior mix of standardization, execution speed, and cost efficiency. European telecoms companies rallied behind the GSM standard, a single interoperable digital standard, giving them massive economies of scale, faster product cycles, and seamless global roaming capabilities. In contrast, US and Japanese vendors were split between multiple incompatible systems, fragmenting their R&D and market focus. The Europeans had battle-hardened rollout experience from deploying GSM across dozens of countries with different regulations, terrain challenges, and spectrum bands, making them more adept at delivering turnkey projects in emerging markets. Cost was another factor. European firms like Ericsson and Nokia created compact and cost-effective infrastructure. Their designs were smaller, more affordable than the bulky systems used by US companies, which were often designed for their local markets. The Japanese were represented by major firms like NEC, Fujitsu, Mitsubishi, Hitachi, and Panasonic. While these companies were technologically advanced, their strategic focus in the 1990s was heavily oriented towards Japanese domestic PDC standards. This inward focus ultimately limited their export potentials, especially as GSM standard emerged as the global default. By the time the Japanese manufacturers pivoted to WCDMA 3G standards in the 2000s, the European vendors had already entrenched themselves in most 2G GSM and 3G tenders worldwide. Nokia has a long-standing presence in the telecoms industry. Founded in 1865 as a Finnish pulp mill, it transformed into a global telecoms giant in the late 20th century, pioneering mobile technologies with innovations like 2G GSM and early 5G solutions. The company reached its peak in the early 2000s, dominating the global market for handsets with over 40% market share. But this dominance was shattered in the early 2010s with the coming of the smartphone, which allowed newcomers like Apple and BlackBerry to capture the market. In 2007, around the time Apple was launching its first iPhone, Nokia partnered with Siemens. Nokia Siemens Network was established as a joint venture combining Nokia's network business with Siemens' gear business. After setbacks in mobile phones, Nokia doubled down on networks. It strategically acquired Motorola's telecom assets in 2011 and fully absorbed its historic rival, Alcatel-Lucent, in 2016. This consolidation transformed Nokia into a pure-play infrastructure leader, investing heavily in R&D to develop carrier-grade 5G equipment. Nokia was among the first to launch 5G solutions in 2017, re-establishing itself as a pioneer. Today, it leverages its expertise in Open RAN and AI-driven optimization to provide tailored 5G solutions for cities, factories, and private enterprise networks. Its AirScale products portfolio delivers the scalable, low-latency connectivity demanded by major carriers in the US and Europe. Nokia now maintains a strong competitive presence in key Western markets, holding approximately 15% of the global infrastructure market. In both Europe and North America, it fiercely competes with Ericsson for the top spot, with its market share in these regions fluctuating between 30 to 60%. However, the company faces challenges in emerging markets. Nokia seems to be holding its ground after losing market share to lower-cost competition from China. Ericsson is the other major Western provider of telecom's base station equipment. Established in Sweden in 1876, Ericsson has evolved from a pioneer of early telephone equipment into a cornerstone of modern mobile infrastructure. Today, it stands as one of the two major Western providers of telecom base station equipment, renowned for its flexible, high-performance, and energy-efficient solutions. In 2006, then UK-based telecoms giant Marconi fell on dire straits after a period of financial struggle. Marconi had banked its last hope of survival on winning a slice of a huge British telecoms contract to migrate its national phone network to an internet protocol platform. British Telecom named 8 companies as winners of the $14 billion 21st Century Network project. The winners were Fujitsu, Huawei, Alcatel, Cisco, Siemens, Lucent, Ciena, and Ericsson. Marconi did not make the cut and will later file for bankruptcy. Its wireless base station division, including 2G, 3G infrastructure, was then acquired by Ericsson during the bankruptcy liquidations. These moves helped cement Ericsson's position in what is now the Scandinavian duopoly that dominates the Western market, a position facilitated by the exclusion of Chinese competitors on security grounds. Globally, Ericsson holds approximately 14% of the telecoms equipment market. It is currently the market leader in America through partnerships with major carriers like Verizon and AT&T. As a single entity, the European Union represents the world's third largest market for base stations. Its scale is substantial, approximately twice the size of the American market, a reflection of the region's high population density, advanced urbanization, and near universal mobile penetration. Beyond its sheer size, the EU is also an exceptionally lucrative theater for mobile operators. While it trails the revenue-generating power of the American and Chinese markets, it remains one of the most profitable regions globally. This commercial strength is driven by its leading national markets, with Germany, the United Kingdom, and France standing out as primary engines of the European telecoms sector. In Europe, Ericsson maintains a slender lead over its rival Nokia. However, its position is more challenged in developing markets across Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia, where lower-cost Chinese competitors have made significant inroads. And while India has been a stronghold in Asia, Ericsson now faces new competition from emerging Indian players like Tejas Networks and Jio Platforms, signaling another challenge for relevance in the developing markets. Ericsson was started as a telegraph repair shop by Lars Magnus Ericsson in 1876. At the time, the Bell Company had already introduced the telephone, and telephones were gaining in popularity. Ericsson noticed something interesting. Customers were coming to a shop to fix their broken phones, not to repair telegraphs. He seized the opportunity to make his own telephones and started a venture to provide telephone lines to every building in Stockholm at low cost. The company built a central switching system and started connecting nearby households. By 1885, Stockholm had more phone subscribers than any other city in the world. Ericsson didn't stop there. He expanded to China, Russia, and Mexico. By the time he retired in 1903, his company was operating in around 100 countries. Fast forward to the 1960s, when analog telephone switching systems were getting overwhelmed by customer demand and needed to be replaced with higher throughput digital switching systems to handle more calls. But Ericsson didn't have the funds to create that device on its own, so they teamed up with the Swedish state telecoms provider Televerket to create the digital switch. By 1976, the AX switch had taken over the world. This caused Ericsson to be in high demand around the globe, even in the newly oil-rich Middle East. Ericsson teamed up with Philips for a large contract to roll out telecom systems in Saudi Arabia. A part of the contract was a request from the Saudis to deliver a fully modern cellular mobile network. The year was 1977, the Saudi government, facing the monumental challenge of connecting a sparsely populated nation, needed a communication solution to fit that need. Fixed telephone lines was needed for the larger cities like Riyadh, but were impractical and prohibitively expensive to build across the deserts. The Swedes presented a bold vision, a nationwide cellular network based on their yet-to-be commercially launched NMT standard, a staggering proposition to build the first commercial cellular network in the world, and to do that in one of the most demanding places on the earth. The network had to cover the inhospitable terrain between Riyadh and Jeddah, a distance of nearly 950 kilometers of sand and rock. The plan was for a chain of base stations, each with a towering mast stretching across the desert to create a continuous radio highway. This project became a trial by fire for Ericsson's engineers. They weren't just installing equipment, they were inventing the rulebook of deploying large-scale mobile infrastructure in one of the harshest areas, a logistical nightmare involving convoys of trucks navigating trackless deserts. Engineers battled extreme heat that could fry delicate electronics and sandstorms that could scar paint from metal. They had to adapt equipment designed for Scandinavian cold to withstand Arabian heat. To cover the large distances, Ericsson pushed the technology to its limits, developing high-power base stations and sophisticated antennas. Despite the hurdles, the drive to succeed was relentless. The Ericsson team, a mix of determined Swedes and local partners, worked around the clock to get the job done. On September 1, 1981, the Saudi Arabian mobile telephone service was officially launched. It was the first commercial NMT network in the world, beating the launch in the Nordic countries by 2 months. For the Saudi kingdom, it was a technological leap that bound the nation together with pride. For Ericsson, it was an unqualified triumph, proving they were not just sellers of hardware, but builders of network. They had also proven that their NMT system wasn't just a lab prototype, but was a robust, reliable technology that could work under extreme circumstances. It was a concrete working reference that Ericsson could point to when bidding for contracts in Europe, like a pivotal one in the Netherlands. The Netherlands in the early 1980s became an unexpected corporate battleground. The prize was a contract to build one of the first automated mobile networks on mainland Europe based on the pioneering Nordic mobile telecom standard. At the time, the American giant Motorola was the world leader in mobile radios with over half the global market share. Ericsson was the leader in telecom switches, but an underdog in radio gear. The Dutch state telecoms company, PTT Netherlands, pragmatically selected Ericsson's digital axe telephone exchange to manage calls and network intelligence, and Motorola for the radio base stations that will blanket the Dutch landscape. For Ericsson, this was a bitter pill. To be relegated to just one part of the system was to miss the future. To the Dutch, Ericsson's radio division, SRA, simply lacked the sophisticated cell planning expertise needed for their densely populated country. The talks were going in circles, and Ericsson was on the verge of accepting its limited role. The stage was set for a final negotiation in the Netherlands. The atmosphere was tense. The Dutch team reiterated their position, Ericsson for the switch, Motorola for the radios. Frustrated and with everything on the line, Akka Lundqvist, the president of Ericsson SRA, made his move. He slammed his fist on the table and delivered an ultimatum to the Dutch officials, announcing they were not there to sell pieces, but they were there to sell a solution, a complete integrated system from one supplier. This was a radical shift in strategy. He argued that a system with a switch and radio designed and built by a single company would be more reliable, more efficient, and far easier to manage. It was an all-or-nothing gamble. The Dutch were taken aback, but they listened. The convenience and integration of a single supplier, coupled with Ericsson's newfound radio expertise, presented a compelling case. The gamble paid off, and the Dutch reversed their decision. Motorola, the presumed winner, was sadly shut out. Ericsson, the underdog, had won the contract to supply the entire NMT system for the Netherlands, both the axe switch and the radio network. This victory was a turning point that defined Ericsson's destiny. It proved the power of the total system approach and catapulted Ericsson from a component supplier into the world-leading force in mobile telecommunications, a position it will leverage to conquer global markets for decades to come. During the 80s, mobile telephony became popular around the globe, but the mobile standards were all over the place. You couldn't use your phone in many countries across the continent since roaming wasn't an option. Ericsson was a key player in helping unite mobile standards around the world and were also innovators in the handset market, leading the charge in making handsets more compact and portable. GSM was the first ever mobile network created for use in every country in Western Europe. The Europeans, led by France and Germany, were beginning to unite to form an economic union. The European Union became a major advocate for this standard, as they believed it would enhance seamless cross-border communication, promoting European integration and symbolizing collaboration. It took many years for vendors, operators, and governments to define and agree on this unified standard. The final outcome was GSM, a full digital complex technology that required advanced digital signal processing and complicated algorithms to manage mobile networks. GSM was introduced in 1991 and spread globally, achieving economies of scale that quickly lowered the cost of mobile telephony. It brought phone systems to countries that had never had any form of telephone service. The technology was primarily designed for voice calls and later incorporated text messages through SMS, but it wasn't intended for transmitting large volumes of data. And with the advent of the internet, a new standard was necessary. That's when 3G came into play. European telecom equipment leaders Nokia and Ericsson employed a global sourcing strategy, integrating best-in-class components from European, Japanese, and American suppliers rather than designing their own core components at scale. Unlike more vertically integrated competitors in China and Russia, they focus R&D on overall architecture, software, and specialized technologies like photonics, while strategically sourcing best-in-class components from a global web of leading semiconductor suppliers. While both companies design their own custom ASICs for specific tasks, they rely on a global market for programmable logic and general processing chips. For flexibility in prototyping and baseband processing, they use FPGAs from American leaders like Intel, AMD, and Marvell. Their baseband servers run on Intel Xeons and AMD EPYC CPUs, while AI-driven network functions and acceleration are handled by NVIDIA's GPUs and specialized chips from Marvell and Broadcom. For the power amplifiers that boost, transmit, and receive signals, they rely on high-efficiency GaN and LDMOS devices from American firms like Qorvo, Wolfspeed, and MACOM, as well as Dutch company NXP Semiconductors. In the filters category for signal clarity, essential surface acoustic wave and bulk acoustic wave filters are supplied by Japanese leaders like Murata, TDK, Taiyo Yudin, alongside American supplier Qorvo. Acting as a translator between analog and digital worlds, high-speed data converters, ADCs and DACs are another vital category sourced mainly from American companies like Analog Devices, Texas Instruments, and Teledyne. Finally, for network connectivity, they integrate high-speed network interface cards and smart NICs from leading suppliers like Broadcom, Intel, and NVIDIA's Mellanox division. European telecom giants Nokia and Ericsson have built their global leadership by mastering a strategy of systems integration. By orchestrating this diverse portfolio of American, European, and Japanese technologies, Nokia and Ericsson concentrate their innovation on creating differentiated carrier-grade systems. This model allows them to deliver cutting-edge performance and efficiency without being burdened by the immense cost of developing components internally. Base stations can be categorized along three primary dimensions: coverage and capacity, macro base stations versus micro base stations, reliability and performance, carrier-grade base stations versus enterprise-grade base stations, and architectural approach, traditional RAN base stations versus Open RAN base stations. Macro base stations form the backbone of public cellular networks, providing wide area coverage that can span several kilometers. These high-power installations, typically transmitting between 10 to 40 watts, are mounted on cell towers, rooftops, or dedicated masts. They are engineered to support hundreds or even thousands of simultaneous users, delivering blanket coverage across cities, suburbs, and rural areas. In contrast, micro base stations serve more localized needs. Micro base stations address the need for targeted high-capacity coverage. With a range of between 200 meters to 2 kilometers and a power output of 1 to 10 watts, they are deployed on building ceilings, building sites, or indoors. Their primary role is to enhance network capacity and fill coverage gaps in dense, high-traffic areas where macro cells are inefficient. Places like stadiums, shopping malls, airports, and train stations are where they are installed. The telecoms industry also distinguishes between carrier-grade and enterprise-grade equipment based on performance and reliability standards. Carrier-grade equipment is built for public network operators and must meet the telecoms industry's most stringent reliability standards, the 5 nines, 99.999% availability. This translates to less than 5 minutes of downtime per year. These systems are designed to be always on, capable of withstanding harsh environmental conditions while supporting thousands of users simultaneously. Major vendors like Ericsson, Nokia, and Huawei specialize in these robust systems that form the foundation of national mobile networks. Enterprise-grade equipment serves a different purpose. It offers a cost-effective solution for private network deployment, such as those for factory automation, hospital communications, or university campuses. It maintains a high level of reliability, typically around 99.9%, 3 nines, which is sufficient for most business applications where extreme cost of carrier-grade robustness is not justified. The rise in private 4G and 5G networks has driven demand for these accessible solutions, often supplied by smaller specialized vendors. The latest distinction is the shift from proprietary integrated systems, traditional RAN, to open disaggregated architectures, Open RAN. Traditional RAN relies on single vendor providing tightly integrated hardware and software. In contrast, Open RAN utilizes standardized interfaces to allow operators to mix and match hardware and software from different suppliers, fostering innovation, reducing costs, and avoiding vendor lock-in. The transition to 5G is accelerating a fundamental architectural shift, the move from traditional RAN to virtualized RAN. This change is driven by the need to overcome the limitations of traditional systems like rigid infrastructure, vendor lock-in, and high scaling costs. By leveraging cloud-native principles, vRAN delivers the agility required for 5G, enabling ultra-low latency and massive device connectivity. A virtualized radio access network decouples software from hardware. It replaces proprietary hardware-based systems with software-defined systems running on commercial off-the-shelf servers. This centralizes baseband processing and enables dynamic resource allocation, making networks more flexible and efficient. This new software-centric approach has attracted powerful new entrants. A notable alliance between cloud giant Amazon Web Services, Samsung, and AI leader NVIDIA has recently entered the field, challenging the established players. The Scandinavian duopoly of Nokia and Ericsson dominates Western telecoms equipment market. However, as the industry looks towards 6G, their stronghold is becoming vulnerable. They now face multiple threats to their position driven by geopolitical shifts like decoupling, technological shifts to vRAN, and the rise of agile US software challengers. Europe stands at a crossroad. The continent that gave the world GSM, that pioneered mobile communications and created a template for global standards, now struggles to compete in the technologies it helped invent. Europe's regulatory approach has shifted dramatically since the GSM era. Back then, regulations focused on enabling cooperation, that is, harmonizing spectrum, facilitating roaming, and creating common standards. But now, regulation focuses on restricting behavior, like protecting privacy, limiting platform power, and managing content. GSM required extensive regulation to create a unified European mobile market. But that regulation was enabling, not constraining. It created the conditions for innovation rather than prescribing its limits. GSM demonstrated that cooperation across national boundaries can create scale sufficient to compete globally. The 15 operators from 13 countries that signed the original MOU committed to deploying compatible technology, enabling international roaming, and creating a unified market. Today's tech sector faces the opposite dynamic: fragmentation masquerading as integration. Startups must navigate 27 different regulatory regimes, tax systems, and business cultures. The corporation that created GSM needs revival for the digital age, not through harmonization for its own sake, but through genuine integration that allows European companies to achieve the scale necessary to compete globally. The ingredients exist: world-class research institutions, talented engineers and entrepreneurs, a market of 500 million consumers, and growing political recognition that technological sovereignty matters. That's all, folks. Please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.